Veni Domine, Maranatha, sito veni Maranatha.
Our speaker this evening is Dr. Alan Harrelson. He is a native South Carolinian who now resides on a 200-acre farm in the mountains of southeast Kentucky. He works remotely from his home in Kentucky. I'm a bit jealous about that. I'd love to work remotely from my home. His doctoral research focused on the history of American rural life and the historical significance of Southern agrarian thought. Dr. Harrelson's a recent convert of the church. I actually would like to have him come back already and give his testimony on his conversion. His current research interests explore the contributions of Catholic writers and thinkers to the literary history of rural America. An avid pipe smoker, Harrelson offers commentary on all things pipe smoking through a social media brand called The Pipe Cottage. And the title of his lecture tonight is The Wisdom of Hilaire Belloc on the Servile State. And if we could give a nice, grand, authentic welcome to Dr. Alan Harrelson.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Well, I am not from Michigan, so I remain unapologetically unreconstructed in my Southern identity. And so I have been Catholic, well, confirmed Catholic now for a total of 10 months. So I don't know everything that needs to be known at this point. So bear with me. God has been at work in my life. One of the ways He's been at work is I didn't die on the airplane today. I have this fear of flying. But thank God I made it through it one more time. My doctoral research, as you have already heard, dealt with Southern history, with the Southern agrarians. Has anybody ever heard of the Southern agrarians? All right, good. Has anybody ever heard much about Hilaire Belloc? Okay, good. All right. So many of you are probably more astutely familiar with Hilaire Belloc's full canon compared to me. But my interest in Belloc does not begin simply yesterday or simply a few months ago when I was invited to come give this lecture. I have been interested in him for at least 15 years. You cannot read very much about Southern agrarianism without encountering the Distributists. And it seems to me that the Catholic Church has been craving my attention for at least 15 years. All of the wonderful and beautiful and talented people have been Catholic in my life. Well, except family members who are not Catholic and who do not agree with my conversion. But we'll talk about that at another time. Hilaire Belloc, and we'll just get right into that. I could tell you more about my experiences and my joy and the beauty that I've found in the Catholic Church, but that's not what you came here to learn about tonight. One thing that troubles me when reading Belloc's Servile State is that he may have been right when he asked this question: will people want to own? Will people want to own property who don't have property? Will people want to have a proprietary economy? I, as some people know, have a YouTube channel. This is sort of a delicious twist of irony. I show up to talk about distributists and agrarianism, and at the same time I have a YouTube channel that brings me to you. This technological world in which we live is oftentimes confusing. But I made a video some months back entitled "Why Modern Life Sucks." I have known for the bulk of my life that modern life just sucks. There's no sense of community across what used to be called Christendom anymore. Everything's too big, too fast, and everybody thinks they're more important than they really are. And so Belloc had a lot to say about that. Belloc argued that owning private property, especially land, is the surest bulwark against what he called the servile state. Now, I'm going to talk more about the servile state beyond the 1912 book that he wrote with that title. He wrote about it in several different areas. So we'll talk about that book and then move on to a couple of other publications. If you are not a property owner, then you are more than likely, especially during Belloc's time, a wage laborer. Belloc saw the wage labor economy as a negative thing, and rightly so. If the bulk of society, particularly Western society, could handle the freedoms and responsibilities that come from owning private property, then we would be a lot better off. Belloc was a genius in the way he articulated how people simply do not want freedom in modern society. They can't handle it. So this question about if people even wanted the responsibility and wanted to own property is a major question throughout his literary canon. Now, by property, I am with Dr. Alan Harrelson on this. The Distributists were talking primarily of land. Now, Belloc did talk a great deal about small business, is what we might call it now. But at the end of the day, he's talking about land ownership. During the early 20th century, in both Europe and the United States, there was a major concern among young people that if they were to settle down with a wife, start a family, build a home, that they would somehow be missing out on a life of adventure and excitement. I saw this. I taught college history for a number of years. I've taught high school history. I got my doctorate from Mississippi State, and I taught maybe 300 people in an auditorium at one time, and I knew that I was only teaching about 5% of the student body. The rest of them didn't care. They wanted a life of adventure. They wanted their piece of paper, their degrees, so they could go off and do something else and not have to sit in the classroom and learn anymore. Home life. Why is it that people consider home life to be a boring way to live, particularly when you're a younger person? Home life, especially after World War I, was seen as boring, unfulfilling, and somehow inferior to a life of fast-paced travel, change, and immediate gratification. And I don't know of any organization or institution that inherently knows that this is wrong better than the Catholic Church. On both sides of the Atlantic during the early 20th century. Now, I'm not giving you a history lesson, but you know that's what I do. So just bear with me. On both sides of the Atlantic, society was quickly moving away from agricultural and rural ways of life to those of more transient and flighty urban settings with decidedly different goals. One thing that I argued in my dissertation is that throughout American history, you can tell a major difference between those who are raised in the countryside and those who are not. Your worldview, the way that you look at creation, often is different between people who are raised in a rural environment and those who are raised in an urban environment. G.K. Chesterton pointed out years after Belloc's Servile State was published that the most extraordinary thing in life happens when an ordinary man marries an ordinary woman and they raise an ordinary family. Unfortunately, then as now, getting married, having children, and raising a family on privately owned property is not a primary objective of the majority of people, even younger people. I have several people in my own family. I've known several people throughout my life, and they are of the opinion that they don't want to get married until they reach a certain age. Usually that's close to 30. In my mind, that is pure selfishness. I remember my daddy used to work with a man, and he and his wife said that they didn't want to have children. And they were going to actively try to not have children. And Daddy, and he's not Catholic, but I remember him telling me as a boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, that that is one of the most selfish decisions that a man can make. Yet people make it every single day. Why? Because they're following money, a personal career. Did you know that it wasn't until the late 19th century, during Belloc's lifetime, that this idea of a professional career comes into existence? The professions. The first history PhD program, for goodness sakes, did not exist until the 1890s. History was considered to be a form of literature, but everything becomes professionalized and people pursue specialized careers, and this is beginning for the first time during Belloc's writing career. Belloc even said of himself, he said, success is now defined by how much money you can make. He said this in the 1930s. But he said, my success as a writer should be based upon how well I write. But he said that's not the case. Success is determined by how many of your publications are sold and how much money you therefore possess as a result. It's completely backwards, and yet we're in this same, the situation has not gotten better. I'm a little bit angry about this topic, actually. Some topics lend themselves more to frivolity, but this one makes me angry. Because I can't see why people enjoy following money rather than God. Why they enjoy following their own career, their own sense of VIP importance. You know, Jesus said, if you want to follow me, you got to lay it all down. Sell your house. Of course, we're talking about a metaphor here. But Jesus was making a very important point. If you want to follow me, you cannot follow money or anything else as an idol at the same time. School children and college students are taught to learn skill sets now. Skill sets necessary to find a good paying job and to draw a decent wage. We are living in the type of society that Belloc and G.K. Chesterton and the Southern agrarians greatly feared. And most people are comfortable with that. And that's the problem. Most people are comfortable with simply drawing a wage, increasing income, without ever putting that income into private property. To have a good job, maybe a suburban home that is identical to millions of other suburban homes around the country. To seek adventure in travel, vacation, consumerism, materialism, things that money can buy. These are now the primary objectives of the majority of people who now make up what used to be called Christendom. Owning productive land used to be the central economic goal of people across Europe and America. Owning land was one of the main reasons this country was settled in the first place. People who could not own land, even in Belloc's own country of England, one of the great historical lessons of the servile state as a book is Belloc's description of what happens to English countryside during the 16th century. The monasteries are shut down by King Henry VIII. 30% of the land in England then becomes consumed by the large estates. Y'all ever watch Downton Abbey? I used to love that show. Oh, until I became Catholic. And then it hit me. This land, this whole estate, there were no large country estates like this. This is what Belloc's argument was. There were no large country estates and country houses in England prior to the Protestant Reformation. The successful farmers, the good farmers. You know, Cato the elder, I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent here, but I don't like reading everything. I like to just talk to you a little bit. Cato the elder, in the book On Agriculture, the first known published piece of Latin literature that we have, he said that to be called a good farmer was the highest accolade that a man could receive. People don't think about this anymore. They don't think about farming. Farming is thought of as being this... just today I got an email from one of my viewers who was watching a video that I made, and he said, "This is ridiculous. There is no golden age in the American past. There is no golden age in history where people are living a bucolic existence." Well, life has never been perfect, but I would take 1750 America over 2024 America any day. Now, you say that to some people and they're going to get kind of mad about it. But I think Belloc, one of his larger points is that the problem with modern man is that he has moved from the country to the city. That was almost impossible to do in 1750 America. For Belloc, modern capitalism fosters a new type of slavery, the servile state, one that capitalizes on the employee's fear of losing a job. This is one of the cardinal points of his concern about modern corporate capitalism. A man will do almost anything to keep a job. And how have we seen that play out since the cancel culture mentality, the cancel culture disease has taken over this country over the past 10 years? From Belloc's perspective, for a person to make most every decision in life based on what might be best for business is no freedom or liberty at all, but merely a form of servitude. Perhaps during no time since Belloc's book was published have we seen the growth of the servile state in the manner we have witnessed in this country since roughly 2010, 2015. Talent, quality, and ability now have less to do with getting a job and keeping a job. What matters is to what degree employees abide by the vision, mission, and DEI policies of company owners. The policies, which may in fact contradict religious scruples. But you don't want to say anything against it. This is what the way the majority of people think. You don't want to say anything against it because you're afraid you're going to lose a job. Belloc said that is a form of slavery. That's a form of slavery. You have no freedom to say what you believe, to be who you are, because of money, because of income. A truly free person, according to Belloc, should have access to property sufficient to build and follow their own vision and their own economic goals. My interest in Belloc and distributism has little to do with economics or social theory, however. His 1912 book is part of a larger canon that he constructed over several decades, where he was criticizing what he called modern man. And I'm going to tell you about an essay in a few minutes that you may or may not be familiar with, which I think encapsulates Belloc's idea of distributism perhaps more than anything I've read. But it's not a very long essay. Belloc's distributism stems not so much from economic theory as it does a single and most controversial question. What type of society is best? Everybody's got an opinion on that. But everybody don't need to have an opinion on that. There are some people who have opinions about too many things. What type of society is best? I think it's a legitimate question. That's a good question for somebody to ponder. Anyone remotely familiar with distributism knows that both Belloc and Chesterton were heavily influenced by Pope Leo XIII's 1891 encyclical Rerum Novarum. Interestingly enough, when you try to type in distributism, Google doesn't know what you're doing. It thinks that you are too stupid to spell distributism correctly. And it puts that little red line under it. Autocorrect. It can't autocorrect. It doesn't know what the word is. Idiots. The encyclical clearly lamented the poor working conditions of industrial employees and the declining importance of agricultural and rural ways of life. Y'all ever raised on a farm? Is anybody left that was still raised on a farm? It's primarily a younger crowd here. And it's very difficult to find people who were raised on a farm now. I bet if you went back a generation or two, you'd find somebody in your family who did. We're not that far removed from the land, is the point. For many years, I have studied the decline of rural America. I am very interested in this topic because I think that a country sells its soul when it begins to rely on somebody else to produce all of the little everyday things that we need. Consumerism. A country also starts to sell its soul when you listen to the salesman who tells you that you must buy something that you can in fact live without. I'd never studied Catholic social teaching until I became Catholic. I didn't even know what Catholic social teaching was. I had no reason to know what it was. But this is what Belloc is speaking about. This idea that man has a responsibility to the created order, to the earth itself, to your fellow man as a part of God's creation. For Belloc, Chesterton, and many others of this period, virtues such, and the reason I'm talking about Chesterton at the same time is because I don't think you can talk about distributism with simply Hilaire Belloc. You must include Chesterton at the same time. Virtues such as honesty, integrity, and morality are best preserved in a proprietary society of independent property owners, not within a society motivated by flighty notions of wealth and progress. Reminds me of a Lord Acton quote. Progress is the religion of those who have none. My earliest exposure to distributist ideas came while reading Eugene Genovese many years ago. Perhaps one of the greatest historians of the American South that ever lived. He was also a devout Catholic. He was a diehard Marxist during his younger years, but thank God he found the church and he got converted to Catholicism. And as a result, his understanding of distributism and Southern agrarianism, this anti-modern ideology that we're talking about, is quite on point. He wrote a book in 1994 entitled The Southern Tradition. Excuse me for talking about the South up here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, but I might be able to teach y'all a thing or two. I bet y'all didn't know what you were getting into tonight, did you? Now, Genovese suggested that, quote, Catholic spokesmen, like Southern conservative spokesmen, do not attack markets per se. Listen to this now. They recognize that markets, especially in earlier times, have served as meeting places for face-to-face exchanges of goods, and it had a civilizing function. So Genovese quotes Pope Leo XIII and Pope John Paul II on this very topic in this chapter, and he concluded that both Catholics and Southern agrarians, quote, protest against the transformation of the market, especially with the rise of a world market, into an impersonal arena in which human relations themselves are treated as commodities. That happens every day in the American economy. Human relations themselves are treated as commodities. What can I get out of you? Why do I need to know you if there's nothing that you can offer me? That is the most anti-Christian attitude to have, because we're supposed to offer others everything that we have, and hopefully that's Christ. A global market continues to dominate our money system at the expense of local home-based economies. So this commodification of human relationships plagues us still. In 1936, now this is the essay I want to tell you about in relation to Belloc, which is not very well known. In 1936, Herbert Agar and the Southern writer Alan Tate co-edited what's called the sequel to the Southern Agrarian Manifesto. The book was called Who Owns America? Published 1936. And several of the original agrarians, Donald Davidson and Lyle Lanier, Alan Tate, they contributed essays, but Hilaire Belloc wrote the final contribution in this publication. This short essay, simply titled The Modern Man, explains the main points of Belloc's idea of the servile state more wisely and more prophetically than perhaps anything else he wrote on the subject. Quite frankly, I think that he did a better job pinpointing what the servile state meant in this short essay than he did in his 1912 book, which makes sense. He had several more decades to think about the topic. So what's going on in 1936 when this essay is written and when the book is published? Nazi Germany is on the rise. The Great Depression is causing many people in both Europe and the United States to question the legitimacy of capitalism, particularly corporate/industrialized capitalism. There are many people in Europe and in the United States who are looking to socialism as the answer to the grievances of the American economy. But there is a third way, again, as Dr. Alan Harrelson likes to call it, a third way which is called Distributism, or as I like to call Southern agrarianism. I sincerely believe that Southern agrarianism is America's version of the distributist philosophy, because both of these schools of thought were saying very much the same thing, and they were not talking to one another about it until this publication in 36. Here is a couple of quotes from the essay. Belloc is offering three things that characterize what he calls modern man. And again, his whole thesis here is that the principal problem, the beginning of the problem at least, is that people have moved from the country to the city. First, this is Belloc. Three things that characterize this man. The first, he has lost the old doctrinal position on transcendental things, which was that of his immediate ancestry, and of which the relics continued nearly to our own time. You got to remember that in the 1930s, there were still many people across the United States who still farmed for a living. My own grandparents didn't have electricity in South Carolina until the late 1940s. And my grandfather was a tobacco farmer. And Europe was far more advanced than particularly the American South was. The American South was still reeling from the Civil War, and it took the Second World War to bring much of the region out of poverty. And so I think that it was right and it was correct for Belloc to be joining forces with these Southern agrarians to write about this common problem. Secondly, as a consequence of this, he has lost his economic freedom, or indeed the very conception of it. Belloc is here saying that most people cannot even think of the idea that they have lost some degree of freedom. They never even think about it. Third, there has been produced in him, by this loss of economic freedom, coupled with the loss of the old religious doctrines, an interior conception of himself which molds all of his actions. In other words, Belloc was apprehensive about people who were working as wage laborers in both his country and in this one, and who thought that's just the way it had always been. And that's the way it has to be. There's no reason to change. There's no possibility to change. But this is from the essay itself. Listen to Belloc. Since a man must worship something, there has been substituted for his ancient worship the worship of the community of which he is a member. There's a new religion. Sometimes it's the worship of the state. But Belloc calls it the worship of community. For with the loss of this old religion, the modern man has also lost the obvious truth that a culture is based upon the philosophy that it holds. You don't have to have a degree in philosophy to have a philosophy. Actually, anybody who tells you that they don't have a philosophy, them thinking that they don't have a philosophy is their philosophy. The most practically important derivative of this attitude is the acceptation by the great mass of modern men of a quasi-servile position. The modern man demands and is at peace in the regular enjoyments of payments doled out to him by his economic masters at regular intervals, usually at the interval of 1 week. Got to have that paycheck. You live for the paycheck. You live from paycheck to paycheck. Belloc says this is not how a healthy civilization is supposed to continue. He actually argues that it can't continue like that. To be secure in the reception of these is his chief aim. The loss of such support, his chief dread. Industrial societies foster consumer culture as the most important result of human work and production. I work so that I can buy stuff that I really don't need. One of the things that's never made sense to me is that we had 100 years of technological innovation so that we could save time. And now we waste the time that we've saved. One works to buy machines. Now Belloc, interestingly enough, and I don't know that I agree with this from a historical perspective, Belloc argued that it wasn't industrialization that was the cause of this problem. It was the fact that the large capitalists, the few people who owned most of the capital, had control of it. The Southern agrarians didn't necessarily agree with that. Andrew Lytle said that a farm is not a place to grow wealthy. It's a place to grow corn. John Crow Ransom, one of the Southern agrarians, he said this in 1930. This much is clear. If a community or a section or a race or an age is groaning under industrialism and well aware that it is an evil dispensation, it must find the way to throw it off. And the charge ends with a warning. There was a key point for the whole distributist and agrarian project. To think that this cannot be done is pusillanimous. That's a big word. How do you like that? And if the whole community, section, race, or age thinks it cannot be done, then it has simply lost its political genius and has doomed itself to impotence. G.K. Chesterton said very much the same thing in his book, What's Wrong with the World? Chesterton said the task of modern idealists is made much too easy for them by the fact that they are always taught that if a thing has been defeated, it has been disproved. Logically, the case is quite clearly the other way. The lost causes are exactly those which might have saved the world. Ooh, that's good. I don't want to run over too much. I got a couple more points and then I'll hush and take some questions. Because I hear there's a bottle of bourbon around here somewhere. Yes, Lord. Thank you, Jesus. This is the end of the essay. The end of Belloc's 1936 essay. He's basically saying there's few people who understand what he's talking about. And I know what he feels like. I know what it feels like. You mean, you just get, most people who are riding down the road every day, they're just trying to make it from one day to the next. They're not thinking that, there might be another way. We might not have to work for somebody else our whole life. Maybe we should start a business. Maybe we should try to figure out how to take more control back over our life. Most people don't do it because they think this is the way it's supposed to be. Wage laborers, servile state. The few who have perceived these truths, the few who can contrast the modern man with that immediate ancestry of his age, but have forgotten, know that the remedy can only be found in a change of philosophy. That is, of religion. They know further that the material test of this change, and at the same time the prime condition which would foster the change, would be the reinstitution of private property. But those who see this fact are few and far between. It is their duty to work upon the lines which their knowledge of the trouble suggests. And Belloc concludes, reform can happen, but it's not guaranteed. We have to work as sufferers who will probably fail, is what he says. The lost causes are exactly those which might have saved the world. I think it's interesting that there is a grassroots back to the land movement happening across the country right now, particularly among Catholic circles. And I'm trying to understand where all this comes from. It seems that Catholicism is very clear about teaching that the created order needs to be stewarded. We are stewards of God's creation. When I was raised in Protestant circles, the created order, the earth, was seen as something that we could do recreation on. Go on hiking trips, take, camping trips or whatever. There was never this sense that the earth itself was just as much a part of creation as we are. An escapist mentality. Why do I care what happens to the earth? Why do I care how the planet and how the land is taken care of by others? I'm going on to heaven soon. What's the point in doing anything about this now? Let somebody else take care of it. That's the mentality that I saw coming up as a boy in Protestant circles. That's not nearly the same way in most Catholic circles. And I appreciate that. So this consumer culture gives most people a brief sense of joy and material contentment. Joy and peace are some of the strongest commodities right now. That's what people are looking for, joy and peace. I just wish I could just take people by the throat and say, if you don't have Jesus, then you're wasting your time. He is the source of joy unspeakable and full of glory, a peace that surpasses all understanding. But I think that Fulton Sheen was right when he said we've reached the point where personal holiness is what's going to bring people to Christ. The world has heard every argument over and over again. Personal holiness. You don't see that very often. This is a quote that I want to mention to you in closing from a man who was not a philosopher, not an intellectual. He didn't have a lot of academic degrees, but he was one of the best painters and artists from Bamberg County, South Carolina that I've ever known. His name's Jim Harrelson. And he made a life painting rural South Carolina scenery. He despised the way industrial civilization had destroyed the low country of South Carolina. And so he wrote this in a small book that he published years ago, and I wanted to leave you with this. In today's America, there's a disturbing school of thought propounding the idea that something new is better, more exciting, and more useful. Throw it away and get a new one. That's the constant cry of this group, who seem unwilling to take the time to glance backward and evaluate. The ways of the world have changed, and it is the selling of the fads and fashions of the day that fill the money drawers. Constant changes of style and the introduction of the new translate into more sales. We are reminded daily by the media that old things are out, new things are in. And listen to this. This kind of thinking has resulted in the reckless disregard and disposal of many of our centuries-old riches of mind and matter. You don't have to be a scholar of distributism or agrarianism to know that something is wrong. Many people across Western civilization know that civilization is almost non-existent anymore. And I think there is a resurgence, particularly among younger people. And I see this all across the South. I think that if the South were to become primarily Catholic, it would be a powerhouse for conservatism. I can go into that in another lecture topic, but Balak's primary concern with this notion of religion is that if you do not have a strong religious base in your civilization, you don't have a civilization at all. You have no sense of morality, no sense of integrity and honesty. And the United States is now one of the most secular and secular humanist countries on the face of the planet. Christianity is growing stronger in countries that do not worship the almighty dollar, largely because they don't have the money to worship. And so there's work to be done. And I'm with G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc. I think that the lost causes are the causes that just might have saved the world. Thank you for your time.